We're here again at the National Library of Israel to see some more treasure from its collection. Raquel, thank you very much for hosting us again. And this time we have a huge manuscript. What is it?
Yes, we do. This is another one of our Quran collection manuscripts. We're looking at a 13th century manuscript, we believe from the place that is called Anatolia of today, and a beautiful, clearly marked Quran. The script is now fairly standardized. This is a variant of what's called Naskh, which was an administrative script that was much more practical than the early Kufic or early Abbasid scripts. Over the course of the 10th and 11th century, we start to see the Naskh script become the dominant script. I think it had to do with the increase in production of Qurans and the increase of consumption. I think you had many different patrons of written material, not just the rulers. You had both public institutions and you had wealthy individuals who wanted Qurans and other texts for themselves. And as Islamic literature develops, the practicalities of the way the scribe works becomes more and more important.
More people own Qurans or more people actually read the Qurans? How many people could actually read Arabic or could read Turkish or Persian? Do we know something about the level of literacy?
Well, the Quran itself was a text that was experienced primarily as an oral text, even among literate populations. And so a text like this would be used in a public setting, but it wouldn't be used as part of liturgy per se. It would be more used for study and for ceremonial purposes. We see here a very clearly written text. There are very few ornaments. We actually have here the three dots that ends the sentence that we have in very early writings, as opposed to a circle or a flower. And then this is a variant of the way the Quran was laid out in one of the Qurans we saw last time. Instead of it being divided into 3 sections, you have the top and the bottom be in a bigger script.
But it's interesting to see this Quran comes from Anatolia, a Turkish-speaking region. Nevertheless, they are interested in having a very elaborate Arabic written Quran.
Absolutely.
So more languages, but the status of Arabic as the language of religion stays.
Absolutely.
Okay. We've just seen a very elaborate manuscript. Maybe you can see an example how it looked like in an earlier period.
Let's do it. This is the Quran that we saw in lesson 2 from the 9th century, but it's useful for the purpose of looking at the language of the Quran as well. As earlier we looked at the structure of the page. So if you remember in the previous Quran, we saw a variant of the Naskh script, the most common script starting in the 11th century and on. Here we are back in the 9th century, and this is the early Abbasid or Kufic script that's much more square and is much more of a block letter. Now, there were several versions of this early Abbasid script. Here you can see, this is an example of an alif, which is a kind of swooped letter, a line with a swoop at the end. And so that's just one of several different early Abbasid scripts. Now, in the earliest Qurans, what I call the Hijazi style Qurans, from perhaps even the 7th century, we now are seeing examples from the 7th and 8th centuries. You had the letters themselves with no vowelization and no punctuation. And then slowly scribes started adding different additional information. So at first they would add even the first stage was to start adding diacritical marks in Arabic. So you can have a line and it can be either be or te or the, as you know. And so the first stage of advanced codification, if we can call it, is to add these diacritical marks. And then the next stage is to start adding in vowelization. That is what is called the dhamma, kasra, fatha, u, a, e, right? And at first the scribes would add it when there could possibly be confusion. And then later on, it was more standardized. And so here we are in, again, I had called this last time an intermediate stage. And so what we're seeing is regular vowelization and almost all of the diacritical marks. But instead of the way the vowelization is written today, which are little symbols, here we have dots, right? And the placement of the dots indicates the sound. So if it's above the letter, then it's an u. If it's on the side of the letter at the base, it's an a. And if it's under the letter, it's an e, right? Right there.
And it's intentionally in red.
It's intentionally in red, and that you see in earlier examples as well. That's the standard, the default.
So what we see here is an example how an oral culture was moving into writing, so they had to invent the writing.
Exactly.
Okay. What else do you have for us?
Here we have a very sweet example of a Quran, obviously well loved and taken care of. And right away you notice it's square, right? The one we saw beforehand was more of a rectangular. The square becomes the paradigmatic Andalusian or North African Quran after this period. This is also a North African Quran, but from the 9th century. And here we're now in the 12th century. Okay? And this is an example of a juz in the sense of the Quran divided into 30. And it has its own handy carrying case, which meant that it was for use. And as we said earlier, a Quran like this would be used if you were going to recite the Quran over the course of a month. And so we are close to the end. We're at this is section number 29. And you have a set of examples of different kinds of scripts. This is a very practical nesk, right? You can see very easy, clean lines. And here you have a double ornamentation page. We'll see another one at the end that's clearer. And here we have the Andalusian script. Now, the Andalusian script is a variant of what's called the Maghrabi, the Moroccan, more North African scripts. And in a lot of ways, it has it preserves some of the early Abbasid, the Kufic script. So by this time, you have the development of this later stage of writing, which is highly standardized in terms of having all of the diacritic marks and having all of the vowelizations and the punctuations right here at your fingertips.
And such a text was prepared by a professional. I mean, it's not something that someone prepares for his own or her own use. You need to buy it from someone.
You need to sponsor it. You would go to either a workshop or a local scribe, but scribes were quite common in the Central Islamic lands. I'm just turning to the end, the decorative end place. And we do know that many different people were scribes at different levels. And there were many women who were scribes. Now this is a commentary on one of the chapters of the Quran, Surat al-Ikhlas, and so it's called the Sidq al-Ikhlas fi Surat al-Ikhlas, and in the middle this is called a Shamsa, a kind of medallion, and here it says that commentary was written by the order of the Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay.
Late 15th century.
And I chose this one as opposed to the other Mamluk Sultan-owned manuscripts that we have because in addition to this beautiful medallion, you have on the side something very interesting, and that is it's a waqf, an endowment, and in which it says that the Sultan Qaitbay endowed this book to go to Jerusalem where we are right now. And it went to the Ashrafiya Madrasa, which was a madrasa, a place of higher learning that he sponsored. And so it attests to the transmission of texts and knowledge, the patronage of learning, and the way in which libraries were created, and as you had mentioned earlier, this issue of fluidity, that texts are moving from place to place. Just to show you a regular page, this is our Nesr script, right? This easily written script, but you notice here a beautiful gold engraved Allah.
So this is late 15th century, endowed by the Sultan to, let's say, a provincial library. So it tells us something about also the level of literacy. It's not just at the upper echelon, but it's really more widely circulated.
Okay, last but not least,
what is this?
This is a very special document. We are looking at the final page of a Quran from early 16th century Shiraz. Shiraz was one of the great capitals of calligraphy. And this blue, which is emblematic of Shirazi design, is crushed lapis lazuli stones. So taking a precious stone and crushing it to create this intense, beautiful blue, and of course pure gold and this burnished orange. These are highly indicative of Shirazi design. This is the one half of a two-page last opening piece, and what we're looking at is a page from what is called the Falnameh, which was the Book of Omens that was attributed to the 6th Shiite Imam, Ja'far as-Sadiq, who died in 742, was a great scholar in his own right, probably didn't write this text, but it was attributed to him, and what it is a way to tell the future. And the fact that it's sitting at the end of a Quran says something very interesting about these crossing lines between normative and more mystical and maybe even magical aspects of religion.
And everything is in Arabic?
This is actually in Persian.
Okay.
These are Persian poetic lines, and the idea is to close your eyes and to point, and that will lead you to your future, which is also connected to, well, here are these letters here, meme. So you point, and then to close your eyes, you point, and then you follow along, and it leads you to telling your future connected to the zodiac.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is a good entry point to look at the other side of this document.
Which is totally different.
Which is totally different, and tells us a different story.
This is Ottoman.
This is Ottoman, and it tells the story of a group of elders from Shiraz who commissioned a beautiful Quran to bring to the, be placed on the gravesite of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina. And here is a document that is told, a story told by the former Qadi, the judge of Medina, who then becomes the judge of Mecca. And he tells a story of how this Quran, when it was traveling to Medina, it met up with the caravan of the Ottoman Sultan. Here it is Murad Khan. Sultan's entourage wanted to see the Quran, and they were so enamored with the beautiful Quran that they insisted on making a copy, and they probably took the original. And as a reward, they had the Quran, probably it wasn't the Sultan himself, but his attendants signed with his ornamental tughra signature on this Quran. And so we have a very interesting cross between Iranian Persian poetry on the one side, and the Ottoman Sultan, who is becoming greater and greater power in this, even in this cross between Iran to Saudi Arabia.
And we also have the merging of several languages. We have Persian, we have Ottoman Turkish, and of course the Quran is always in Arabic.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for showing us all these treasures. Thank you again.
My pleasure.